Hi, and welcome to part 2 of this series of videos covering XtremIO with VMware Site Recovery Manager. So in this phase, we're actually going to go ahead and configure Site Recovery Manager. And the first thing you need to do is actually to install the SRM software that, of course, you download from the VMware website, and the DLEMC XtremIO SRM, which you also need to download from the VMware Site Recovery Manager Adapter tab website. So once it's been downloaded, the installation is really pretty much straightforward. You're just going to need to go ahead and click the next button, and there you go, you just installed the SRA. You can verify that the adapter has been installed by going to the Windows control panel and see that the DLEMC XtremIO SRM is actually installed. You then need to go ahead and actually repeat the exact same steps on the recovery Site Recovery Manager server. Now let's switch to the VMware SRM view using SRM 8.1, which is the latest release by VMware, and it's using the HTML5 UI only, so no more classic web interface for SRM. If we click the view details, I've already paired the SRM, the primary SRM, with the remote SRM and the remote vCenter, which is what you see here. This is not unique to XtremIO, it's the same steps that you do pretty much with every array that is there. But what we do need to do right now is go ahead and configure array-based replication. So the first thing is to validate that it's been properly installed and shown properly by SRM, which is what you see here. You can see that the SRA that we've just installed is properly viewed here on the production website and on the recovery site as well. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is create array pairs. This is how we tell SRM which SRA to use to which XMS to talk to. So just click the add button here. It shows me the SRA that I'm going to use. And here I need to give a name for the local array. This name can pretty much be everything that you want to. Here I need to give it the address or the DNS name of the local X. I'm just going to use IP, but of course you can also use FQDN as well. Give it the local admin username and password. So again, this is just the local SRA speaking to the local XMS. And now I need to do the pairing to the remote array. So the same steps, but with a different IP address and a different name. I can also choose to automatically enable those arrays, which you don't must do, but that's pretty much what you're going to do anyway at some point, so I might as well do it now. Let's give it the IP address of the remote array, which is this one in my case. Again, this is the remote XMS, and the remote admin and admin password. And click the next button. It's now showing me the connectivity is ready and it's ready to be enabled, so let's click the add button, next. And I'm getting the summary screen here, so let's click the finish button. And it's now starting to calculate those remote pairs, which volume is actually being replicated under which session and so on. The time to calculate this will actually vary, depends on how many volumes and consistency groups you have. Here I have only a single consistency group with 2 volumes, so the calculation was super fast. And indeed you can see that SRM using the XtremIO SRA is now detected that we have 2 volumes that are replicating to the remote array under this specific consistency group. So now what we can go ahead and actually do is create an SRM protection group. But before we do it, there is one super step that is important here, which is to do the mapping. These are basically things that telling SRM outside of the storage world which network you're going to use to map to the remote site from the local one, which folders you're going to use, which cluster is going to be the backup cluster that you're going to fail over to, and so on. And the other bit that is storage related is this, placeholder. Placeholder are local data stores per an XMS, per a vCenter site, per an SRM site, that are telling SRM to use them when you modify a file. So every time that you modify a VM and you create protection for it, it will store that VMX configuration in these placeholder data stores. They need to be very small, something around 10 gig or maybe 20 gig, that's it. And they do not need to be replicated because they are local. They are not being failed over when you do a failover. So each site needs to have their own placeholder data store. I've already created them. I'm just going to tell SRM to use them. So this is the data store for the local site, and this is the placeholder for the remote site. That's about it. There's nothing really, again, too much to it. This is where SRM will know that, for example, you change the memory or the CPU or the network mapping on the source site, and it will know to map them to the remote site resources when you perform a test or a failover. So now let's go ahead and actually go to the protection group and create an SRM protection group. A protection group is merely a CG or a collection of consistency group within a protection group, within an SRM protection group. So let's just call it PG01. the direction that I'm going to replicate is from my local site to the remote site. Click the next button. Show you the data store that I want to replicate, data store group. SRM is smart enough to view the consistency group view, and because I've created a single consistency group with 2 volumes in it, it will actually show them in one protection group, because they're going to failover as one entity. So I'm just going to select that consistency group. Here it will show me all the VMs that will be added to the protection plan. And it will ask me, do I want to create a recovery plan now or later? I'm actually going to create it later, so do not add a recovery plan now. Ready to complete, and that's about it. If I will now go to the recovery cluster, I will see that SRM has now created these 4 placeholder VMs. And indeed, if I will go to the VM and then the data store tab, you will see that that VMX file is actually being located on this remote placeholder data store that I've just talked about before. This is not where it's going to recover the VMs from. It's actually going to use these files and manipulate them and move them back to the real recovery volumes when it's actually running operations such as test, failover, and failover operations. So we now have our protection group ready, and we can view some clever things like, again, which data store is being used for these volumes, or which volume and which VMs are actually going to be used here, whether they're protected or not. I can also do some advanced troubleshooting, like maybe some device is protected by that VM or being replicated, or maybe it's not. All of these things are advanced configuration that are not going to be discovered or discussed in this demo, but know that they do exist. Now I can go ahead and actually create a recovery plan, which will tell it, for example, which VM to be boot up prior to the other VM and so on. I can do it from the tab here, which is new, or from the recovery plans here. It will go pretty much to the same thing. Let's actually go here, recovery plans, and create a new recovery plan. Just give it a meaningful name. And which protection group do you want to be recovered as part of this recovery plan? A recovery plan can contain one protection group or more. It's very common that customers will use different consistency groups and different protection group in the same recovery plan and one big master recovery plan for the entire site, which is what I'm going to do here. But here I'm just having a single CG with the 2 data stores that I'm protecting. So click the next button. Again, network mapping for test networking and things of that nature. So this is the auto network, which is super important for a real environment, but we're not going to discuss it here. It's too advanced for these demos. And click the next button, and we are now ready to either test failover the VMs or really failover those VMs. If we actually go ahead to the recovery plan, we can see that we have some interesting features that we can configure. For example, whether we want to power up that specific VMs, or which priority do we want to put it, which basically means which VM should be put up prior to the other VMs that we are powering up. For example, domain controllers will likely to be powered up before application servers that depends on their domain membership will need to be powered on. So all of those features are there. So let's go ahead now and run an SRM test failover. This is the bit that is interesting from a storage perspective. It basically means, do you want to use the snapshot that is already there at the recovery site using the XtremIO replication? Do you want me to perform another last time snapshot before we perform a test failover? So that's the feature, that's what we're going to actually use. And let's click the next button. Click and finish. Now let's go ahead and observe the XtremIO replication at the remote site. We can see that the SRA has actually created a specific snapshot that we discussed before. Now also let's go ahead to the consistency group and see if it's still in read or write membership. So right now it's still in read access, and SRM will take this consistency group at the remote site, take a snapshot out of it, and make it writable so it can power up the VM in a testing environment at the remote site. And there you go, you can now see that actually just transform this consistency group to write access. And if we go to the SRM UI, we can actually see the steps that it's currently in. So it's still on creating writable storage snapshot, which is what I just showed from an XtremIO perspective. It's making these 2 volumes and consistency group writable for SRM to use to power up these VMs. As you can see, it start updating this virtual machine that we discussed before from their placeholder location to actually be running from the real recovery volumes. As you can see, these 2 volumes are already visible, as you can see by their snap suffix. We can of course rename these using the SRM advanced setting, but for the sake of simplicity I'm leaving this as is. Go back to SRM. We can see that it's now completed this phase and it's now actually powering on these VMs, which is what we're seeing from here. We can already see that these VMs have now been powered on. And I can go ahead and right click a VM at that recovery plan and edit setting. And we can see that this VM is actually running in a test isolated environment known as the auto networking feature within SRM. In a real life scenario, you're probably very likely to create your own dedicated virtual switch and virtual port groups for your test network, but bear in mind that the production VMs are up and the recovery VMs, which are a clone of the same VMs, are up. Hence the reason why testing network is so important, and it needs to be isolated from the production network so you won't get IP conflicts or MAC address conflicts and things of that nature. So that's it, all the VMs are now up, and if I go back to the Site Recovery Manager UI, I can see that the test has been completed. I can also go to history and confirm that the test has been performed, which is exactly what we see here. I can also go ahead and export that report for my auditors to show them that indeed the test has been working. So the last step that is remaining for the test to complete is, once I'm happy and satisfied with the fact that these VMs are up and running and their data is consistent, is to actually clean up the test. Clean up the test will go ahead and power off the VMs at the remote site, delete the snapshot, and finally make this consistency group at the recovery site readable again, so we won't be able to power up any VMs or any data out of it. So that's exactly what SRM is now doing. It's actually going to go to the recovery site and start by powering off the VMs, which is already did. It's unmounting the data stores and the SCSI LANs from this ES6 cluster, and it's cleaning up after itself. And indeed, when the cleanup has been completed, we can now again see that this VM CFG file is actually back to the recovery placeholder data store. Go back to the Site Recovery Manager UI, to the recovery step. We can see that cleanup has been completed. And if we go to the XtremIO UI, at the recovery site, we can indeed see that this consistency group is now in read mode access again. That's it. That's what you need to do in order to run a test failover scenario within SRM. Next, let's perform a real failover and reprotect